Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? My old work ran a secret Santa once the week before Christmas. It was a $10 limit and the person I was buying for I didn't know very well. I left my buying to the last minute because I just didn't know what to get her. So I was in town and walking past some shops when lo and behold, I see an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the second-hand bookstore. It just called to me. So I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the cost and guess what? $10. Perfect. So come the day of the secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts. Some 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye I see some people crowding around a woman who is crying. I keep listening and people are calling out for the person who was a Santa. I go over and reveal that it was me. The lady I had bought for was crying and hugged me. She said 10 years ago her house burned down along with all her possessions. The book that I bought her was her favorite and also the exact same edition, so had the exact same cover she remembered. Because it was a second-hand book it was even weathered in the same places she remembered. So it was as if I'd grabbed the book off her shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. Here in my little town in northwest England there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them deliver to our doors. So we know the guys who work there pretty well. They're mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us. 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. Seeing Paul McCartney, the Beatles, on TV in 2001, and noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street, and walking towards me is a really tall guy, and it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression, so he veered my way, stuck his hand out, and said hi mate. I was shocked. 18 years later I'm still shocked lol. Edit, I'm 6'1". Turns out he's 5'11". Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out. I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. He then briskly walked away. A very brief encounter, but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus, went to my favorite front seat and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks my nut out to this day. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places, in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking, so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. My partner and I ran into this Japanese mother and son traveling through Southeast Asia. We ran into them in Siem Reap at the Angkor Wat temples. Then again, in town that night. We left 2 days later to fly to Ho Chi Minh City and they were on the same flight. We politely nodded and smiled. We landed in HCMC and went our separate ways. We went to our hotel, they went to theirs. After dinner on the second night we decided to go to a rooftop bar for a drink. We walked in and they were there. We all laughed and waved. Up to this point we hadn't actually spoken to each other, but we decided to sit down and chat to them for a short while. We didn't actually discuss the rest of our travel plans beyond our departure dates from Vietnam. A few days later we're leaving a hotel to go back to the airport. A shuttle bus picks us up and the Japanese mother and son are on the bus. Turns out the 2 hotels shared a shuttle service to the airport. We didn't know where they were flying to, but turns out they were also flying to Nha Trang and were seated in the row opposite us. We get to NHA Trang and decided to share a taxi into the city. We were staying at the same hotel. By this point it was beyond ridiculous that our paths were crossing this much. So we just accepted it and decided to hang out with them that night, have dinner, and go out for drinks. We get to chatting about our lives. I grew up in a small rural town in Australia. About 18 years earlier we had a Japanese exchange student live with us for about 3 months. Turns out this Japanese exchange student was the brother of the woman sitting across from us. It was mind-blowing. After all the weird path crossing we had already encountered over the last 10 days, this was just the cherry on top. I went back to the hotel that night and sent my mum a Facebook message to send me a photo of the Japanese exchange student. She dug through our old family photos and found one of him and I was 10 or 11 at the time. The next night we had dinner with them again and I showed the mother the photo. She started laughing because it was her brother and she thought I had been making a joke the night before. Crazy times. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as shit I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Me and a friend took some acid one night and were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store. Very quietly bought whatever we went there for and took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak after we got there. Turns out the city had bought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they had all been delivered there and were on the lot for just that night. Was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country about 6,000 miles away with a work colleague. And the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, "I think you're talking about my son." Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mum pictures of our trip. I was in Paris and some Americans were lost. They were the grandparents on edit of my high school classmates from Nebraska. It's a small world. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do, and it was close to the end of the year I guess. So she goes to the big cupo board in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam. So we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life. There's 3 examples, ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2, and I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading, and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother who just moved there. My wife decided she wanted tamale. We drove around for 2 hours stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later somebody knocked on the door of my mother's apartment asking us if anyone wanted to buy any tamales. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. 2 of my great grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great grandfather's house. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he had also just left my small hometown. 2 years ago I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw an old friend post a story showing he was also in Tokyo. We hadn't spoken in a few years, but I sent him a message letting him know we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later, we walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November, I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.